Welcome back. Durell Coleman here with another episode of Social Impact Live. Today I want to continue with our series, The 3 Ways to Change the World, and give you a little bit more information about the second way to change the world. Yesterday we went over the first way, which is called direct impact, which is a method of affecting change where you as an individual use your talents, your skills, your abilities to go out and directly deliver the impact that you're trying to create in the world to real people. And so examples that we covered there were you giving money to someone that you meet on the street who is homeless, you painting windows at a church or at a different location as a volunteer, you serving in a soup kitchen. These are all examples of direct impact. And we see these examples all around us, right? We see other people who do things like this as well. Teachers are an example of direct impact where they directly provide their services, knowledge, coaching, and presence to young people. Firefighters are creating direct impact or carrying out direct impact when they arrive on the scene to put out a fire or deal with another emergency. Those one-to-one engagements are called direct impact. Today, I want to talk to you about the second way of changing the world, the second way of creating impact, and it is called systems redesign, right? So I told you that there were 3 overall. We have direct impact, systems redesign, and then creating a new system. So today we're going to talk about systems redesign. So systems redesign, what is it? And who is it who generally is doing systems redesign? Well, first, let's dive in a little bit to understand what I mean when I talk about a system. So there's a progression between the different types of impact. There is a progression as far as the time input, as far as the unit, as in the number of people who need to be involved to sort of make that happen. And then there is a progression also as far as the time over which an impact can take place, given each of these systems. So what we start with in all situations when we are creating this sort of impact in the world is, or what we see is that the fundamental unit of impact is actually rooted in direct impact, right? As we create those direct impacts over and over again, we might seek to repeat those and replicate those time and time again, right? When we do that, when we create ways of replicating an impact over and over again, whether it's a good impact or it's a bad impact, whether we are giving food to the homeless or whether we're selling a product, whatever it is that we are replicating, in order to replicate it, we need what is called a system. Right? A system allows us to produce the same outcome over and over again, right? And so while there are ways to create our own systems, which we'll talk about more tomorrow, what we find as we are born into this world is that there are systems all around us, right? So there are systems all across society, social systems, you can call them, that produce the same outcomes over and over again. So who are some of the people who work within these systems, and what are some of these systems in the first place? So examples of people who work within these systems would be government employees, for example, employees at existing nonprofits and foundations, people who work at consulting firms like my own, DC Design. We work to redesign many times existing systems in order to produce better outcomes and deeper social impact for the people that we are trying to serve, right? Which is low income people of color, generally in America, who the systems weren't originally designed for in the first place. So what are some examples of these systems? Well, I gave you a few already that, I mentioned teachers before, I mentioned firefighters before. For example, we have our educational system, right? We have our emergency response system, right? We have a criminal justice system. We have a foster care system, an education system, a healthcare system, all of these systems that already exist. So systems redesign is really about altering how those existing systems function to deliver impacts to people differently than how those systems are currently delivering those impacts, because systems are built to replicate the same outcomes over and over again, right? So that is a breakdown of sort of what systems redesign looks like. And I'll tell you that I spend a lot of time thinking about this element, right? As we scale from direct impact into the systems level of things, that's where we really begin to see either the reproduction of great outcomes within a society, right, or the reproduction of really harmful ones. And as a firm, as DC Design, I spend a lot of time thinking about, where do our systems produce positive outcomes and where do they produce negative outcomes? So when we think about something that was really good in the history of the United States, the standardization of education, right, the spreading and the public funding of a free public education for all students in the country was the creation of a system, which we were born into. If you're watching this right now, that system existed by the time that you were born, and it has produced, millions and millions of people who are able to read, are able to write, are able to communicate with one another, are able to do a whole bunch of things, and it produces that consistently year after year after year. At the same time, that system has flaws, it has challenges within it. And our job as social impact innovators who are focused on systems redesign is to figure out what those things are. What are the outcomes being spit out of these systems? And how do we alter the system so that it maintains what's good and then eliminates what isn't good? So, just a few examples of the work that we've done in this space so that you have an idea of what this means. So DC Design works with governments, foundations, and nonprofits to address these root causes of poverty, inequality, and poor human health. And the systems that we've had the chance to work on redesigning have been numerous, but a few examples of our work. We worked on criminal justice reform in Santa Clara County, California. And the focus of our work in Santa Clara was on reducing the number of people in jail and reducing the rate at which people were returning to jail after leaving jail, right? It's called recidivism. And it's basically this concept that when you are released, are you prepared for the world? Are you prepared to live a life that won't lead you back to being incarcerated? There are all sorts of factors that lead to someone being reincarcerated. Some of those are legal issues. Some of those are challenges with how the existing laws are set up and how challenging it is at times to abide by the new laws that you face once you've been incarcerated. But many of those as well come down to the environment, the opportunities that you have available. And so those were the things that we were focused on. So we worked with the Office of Reentry Services in Santa Clara County, as well as stakeholders from all across the community, all across the county itself, from the sheriff to the DA, the public defender, faith-based organizations and more, to redesign how aspects of the jail reentry process, the process for leaving jail, function, right? And what that looked like was us going in using our human-centered design methodology to understand the needs of people who were incarcerated, had been incarcerated, as well as all these different stakeholders, to say, here are the things that are really going to move the needle when it comes to changing outcomes, right? So an example of an element within that system that is repeatedly broken and is broken in most criminal justice systems comes down to a quote that I heard from a gentleman that I was interviewing who was incarcerated. He said, if you can't work, you go to jail. If you don't have housing, you go to jail. That's what he said, actually. So that was the quote. If you don't have housing, you go to jail. And what he was referring to here was when you leave incarceration, it is often really challenging to know where you're going to stay. It is often really challenging to know where you're going to work. And the reality is that these things are linked together. So if you don't know how you're going to work, you don't know where your income is going to come from, you can't make a living, right? Then you can't pay for housing. And if you can't pay for housing, often if you've been incarcerated, you may have strained relationships with your family, or you just might not have the resources or the contacts to be able to find a stable place to stay. You end up on the street. And So his point was, if you don't have housing, you go to jail. He was basically saying, like, anyone who is on the street for long enough is going to end up in jail, and for him that means back in jail, right? So that was an element that we were understanding, we were discovering, we were unpacking, and then we were highlighting as something that the county really needed to focus on addressing in order to change the outcomes that they were seeing. That was an element of the system that needed to be altered. And so since then, they have amplified the number of job programs, job opportunities. They've tried to create more of a pipeline revolving around that issue, so that there is a greater understanding of how to get employment, and a greater, hopefully, eventually, set of job opportunities available for people leaving incarceration to be able to support themselves, to be able to pay for the housing that they need and the other things that they need to not end up back in jail. So that's just one example from our work, but we've done a number of other things. We've worked on increasing the number of Latino and other English language learner students in pre-K, so in early childhood education. This was an example of altering how the existing system functions, because we weren't creating a new pre-K system. What we were doing was we were altering the recruitment tactics and methods of the existing pre-K systems. They existed already in school districts in the Central Valley. We came in, we worked with the James B. McClatchy Foundation as well as 4 school districts there. And through that work, we were able to help them alter some of their existing systems, as well as, I can talk about this tomorrow, build new systems to actually increase the number of English language learner students enrolled in their pre-K classes, right? So that's an example of systems redesign. My last example that I'll give you real quick is just work around housing and homelessness. So DC Design had the opportunity to work with another incredible firm called Hester Street, which is based in New York City. And we worked with them on what's called the Cities Rise project. It was funds that were allocated to governments in cities across New York. Those were funds that had been won in settlements from the big banks whose actions resulted in the housing crisis of 2008 and the recession that we experienced there. That money that was won from those cases went to these cities to fund changes to the code enforcement process, which is a department, a little known department, right? A little known department that's part of a system that goes around, and their job is basically to inspect buildings and then say, this building is up to code, this building is under violation, this building needs to be condemned because it's not safe for people to live in, right? It's a very important job. It's not one that many people know about. We worked with code enforcement officers in these cities of Newburgh and Syracuse to develop and alter their existing systems in order to better serve some of the residents that they were ultimately evicting, right? Build better relationships with low-income residents of color, understand what their needs are more, and figure out some of the results of their actions. The example that I'll give you is that in one of these cities, through this work, there was a realization that when we condemn a building, right, we're condemning a building. This is code enforcement. Code enforcement is condemning a building because it's unsafe. Well, a building that's unsafe is often owned by a landlord who hasn't paid for the upkeep on that building. Sometimes that landlord doesn't even live in the city, right, that the building is in. When they condemn that building, what they're ultimately doing is they are depriving that landlord of funds, but they are also saying this building isn't safe. We need to get people out of this unsafe environment. The challenge is that the people who live in really low income buildings, places that are likely to have these issues where the floor or the ceiling is caving in, where there's no running water, etc. Those are generally really low income people. And in America, low income people tend to be people of color. So you have this issue where when you condemn a building, you're actually often instantly making homeless tens, maybe dozens of low-income people of color within a community. And this was something that came up during this project, was a realization. And with that, we were able to work with the city to think through alternative methods of housing folks after the building that they lived in had been condemned. So if you're a low-income individual, you get evicted overnight from the place that you live. This building is now condemned. No one can be here. Everyone needs to be out right away. Where do you go? Do you have enough money to live in a hotel for a week or for 2 weeks or for a month while you figure that out? Do you have family nearby? Do you have family anywhere around you at all? It's a really challenging situation. And so those are the types of things that systems redesign is focused on, and those are some examples of systems redesign from DC Design's work. I want to close this out by just talking about a few more categories of things around this. So in systems redesign, the inputs are transient, but they tend to be ongoing. So I mentioned yesterday, when you're doing direct impact, if you give money to an individual who's homeless, you're walking down the street, that is a transient input. The impact of that is also transient because that person's going to use that money and then they're not going to have that money anymore. Right? When you're talking about systems are created to replicate the same outcomes over and over again. And so what that means is that even though the inputs are still transient, the firefighter who is fighting fires is carrying out a transient action. It's going to put out that one fire. It's not going to keep the house from going up in flames again. He's part of a system that repeats that over and over. So the input is ongoing in that he can return to that scene again, and he'll have the equipment and he'll have the access to be able to put out the fire the next time. An individual who gives money to the homeless, it is carrying out a transient set of actions. An organization that perpetually gives money to the homeless as part of their outreach creates an ongoing set of transient actions. And that's something that I really want to double click on that, because I want to say that like direct impact is the foundation for all of impact. The question just becomes how ongoing, how repeatable is that? And then how long lasting is the input? Okay. That's really what I have for you, actually. So those are the pieces of it, right? So the inputs are transient, but ongoing. The outputs that you receive from this are things that can be received over and over again. And so really what systems redesign is about, just to recap, is focusing on making the existing systems we have function better, right? And that is the goal of education reform movements, is to look at public education oftentimes and say, how do we make this system that touches so many people better? That is the goal of criminal justice reform efforts, is to say, how do we make the existing criminal justice system work better? Tomorrow I'm going to talk more about the last type of impact, which is creating a new system, and some of the merits, some of the pros and cons of that, and also some of the characteristics of it. Also, when would you want to create a new system versus redesigning the existing system itself? All right. So that's a little bit about the second way to change the world, systems redesign. If you have any questions, please enter those in the chat. I will try to respond to those as quickly as I can. And if you're watching this on a replay, hit hashtag replay. And if you like this content, if you're following this and you're saying, wow, this was helpful, this was interesting, I want to learn more about social impact design. I want to learn more about how to create change in my community. I want to learn more about how to build a business that can sustain itself to do good in the world. I'm interested in social entrepreneurship. I'm interested in helping people and figuring out how I can use my life to do that. If that's something that's interesting to you, hit the like, follow, subscribe button where you're watching this. I go live every day at 9 a.m. Eastern time. I'd love for you to get a notification just letting you know that I'm going live. And I'm looking to build this community of people who are interested in this, so I can also start responding to questions that you have. This is the work that I get to do every day. I get to serve people in this way, and so the more people who are involved in that along with me, the better. So if that's you, go ahead and do that, and I will see you tomorrow.